In this video, we're going to put together our chat component. So our chat component is going to be reused between our lobby and our game, and as a result, it needs to be abstracted out, and it needs to be usable from either context. So the way I'm going to start this off is I'm going to start off by specifying some prop types in my chat component. So I'm going to go into chat.js, and I'm going to go ahead and specify what I require whoever uses the chat component to include in the props of using the chat component. So I'm going to import prop types from React. And then on top of this, I'm going to say static prop types equals, and then I'm going to specify what's required. First of all, obviously, our messages. So I'm going to say prop types.array is required. Then we're going to have op send message, which is going to be a prop types object is required. Now, in this course, we're going to have these things called ops. And op is, of course, short for operation. Every single thing, every single variable or property that I prefix with op is going to be a data structure that contains 3 fields, or rather 4. There'll be a property called can, which will be a Boolean indicating whether or not you are allowed to perform that operation. There'll be a property called in progress, which will be a Boolean indicating if the operation is currently asynchronously executing. There'll be an error property sometimes if there was an error for that operation, and there will be a has failed property indicating if that operation did indeed fail. So the final property that we're going to require is send message, which is going to be a callback. So we're going to do prop types func is required. So all these 3 things are going to be required. If I save this out right now, we'll get errors over here. If I refresh so that the component's reloaded, we should get errors indicating that we didn't specify those prop types. And of course, we're not getting those errors because prop types is supposed to have a lowercase p. For whatever reason, whenever I use the static keyword, I sometimes just automatically uppercase it in my mind because of my long, extensive history with C#. But now we are getting that error. If I refresh, we should get those errors as well. That's just React telling us we didn't specify these property values correctly from its consumer. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to jump back into our lobby, and I'm going to provide just basic test data so that we satisfy these props. So let's come into our lobby. And in the lobby, I'm going to start off with creating a another callback up top called send message, which will take in a message, and we'll simply we'll console log out a template string saying sending message. Of course, it doesn't do anything yet, but it will once we create our dispatcher. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a const op send message, I believe. Of course, the variable name doesn't have to be the same here, but I want it here for continuity. I'll specify can is true and in progress is false. Then I'll specify some messages. And the way we're going to structure our messages object is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to have an index property. And the index property is just going to be a number that, well, it's just going to be an incremented number. Every time a message is sent, the index property will be incremented. And it'll be used as a key to our individual chat message items so that React knows which items to replace or update or delete. So we'll start off with an index of 1, a name of person, and a message of blah. And we can go ahead and copy and paste this a couple times. The only thing you really need to change is make sure that your index is different every time. Maybe we'll change one of these people, and then we'll just put in some garbage into the message. Doesn't matter. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and pass these props into our chat component so that we can start writing it. So I'm going to start off by saying messages equals messages. Then I'm going to say, why are you throwing an error? Messages. Messages is not undefined. Oh, that's because I didn't put an S there. We'll say op send message equals op send message, and we'll say send message equals this underscore send message. And that will satisfy our chat component so that we can write it out in its entirety without having to worry yet about where this data is coming from. And it's just one of the great things about writing things in an idiomatic React way. We can throw in this garbage data for now while we're building the structure. And then later on, we can actually come here to our top level container component, and we can then hook it into our web service. So let's hop over into chat. The markup for chat is going to be pretty straightforward. Let's delete what we have right there so far. And let's instead return, actually, let's first extract our props. So I'm going to say const, I'm going to use object deconstruction. I'm going to do messages op send message. And I'm not going to grab the send message just yet. We'll be doing that up in the constructor of chat once you'll see why in a moment, because before we send the message, we have to clear out the text box and all that stuff. And then I'm going to return section class name is, not surprisingly, c-chat. Then I'm going to do our messages, which is going to be an unordered list. Let's give it a class name of messages. And I also want to get a reference to it. So I'm going to say ref equals c goes into this underscore messages equals c. And we're going to use this to keep the keep the chat box scrolling properly as new messages are added. Now let's render our messages. I'm going to simply open up some curlies and say messages.map message goes into, and then I'm going to open up an li. I'm going to give each li a key of message.index. Of course, this is required because we are returning an array. Then inside of it, I'm going to say span class name equals author, and message.name span, and then we'll do span class name equals message, message.message, and then end the span. And then underneath the UL, we're going to do form. We're going to open up a form. And then on submit, we're going to say this underscore send message. We're not doing the prop send message. We're going to process the message first before we shoot it off into the callback that the parent passed in. And then inside of this form, we're simply going to have a text input. The text input is going to have a placeholder of op send message can question mark enter a message. Otherwise, please log into chat. Then we're going to access a ref of this as well, because we need to clear out this text input. So I'm going to say ref c goes into this underscore text equals c. Then I'm going to say disabled equals not op send message can. So if op send message can is false, it'll say please log into chat in the placeholder, and it'll disable the input. All right, so we have two more methods to write here. They're both going to be pretty straightforward. Let's start off with the constructor. In the constructor, just like always, I'm going to accept props, and I'm going to super props, pass it into the constructor of the component class. Then I'm going to say this underscore send message equals e goes into, and I'm going to first prevent default. So this will prevent that form from being submitted if you hit enter. Then I'm going to say if not this props. Actually, you know what? I'm going to extract out the props here, maybe even above the prevent default. I'm going to say const op send message, comma, send message equals this dot props. Then I'm going to say if not op send message can return. Then I'm going to say const message equals this underscore text value dot trim. So this will extract the value out of our text box component. Then I'm going to say if message length, message length equals 0, then return, so you can't spam the enter key if you just entered a bunch of spaces. Then I'm going to say send message, then I'm going to say this underscore text value equals blank. And so this will simply, the send message callback will simply be executed every time you submit the form. It'll make sure that you can actually send a message based off the op. It'll then extract the message, trim it, make sure it's not 0 length, and then it'll invoke the callback, and then it'll reset our text box back to empty. The next method we're going to write is a really important lifecycle method. So if you haven't taken a look at the React documentation for lifecycle methods, I would highly recommend doing so. But the method is called a component did update, and that's invoked, not surprisingly, whenever the component gets updated. So whenever there's a new re-render happening, component did update will get invoked, and it'll pass in the previous properties of the previous render cycle and the previous state of the previous render cycle. And then you can decide to do different things depending on what you're trying to accomplish. In this particular case, what we want to do is we want to scroll the chat box all the way to the bottom, if and only if a new message has arrived. So the way we're going to do it is we are going to add something to our constructor. I think I'm going to do this above our this.send message. I'm simply going to say this underscore last message, or how about last index equals -1. And then I'm going to write a callback, component did update. Now it's important to understand component did update only gets invoked in subsequent renders. It does not get invoked for the first render. So what I'm going to do, we can accept 2 parameters if we wanted to, but we don't need them. I'm going to say const messages equals this props, so I'm going to extract that out. And I'm going to say if messages length equals 0, return. Then I'm going to say const new index equals messages at messages.length minus 1 dot index. So I'm extracting out the new index of the last message sent. And then I'm going to say if this underscore last index equals new index, meaning there was a re-render but no new messages were added, then simply return. And then finally at the end I'm going to say this underscore messages dot scroll top equals this underscore messages dot scroll height. The standard way to scroll a div down to, or any element down to the bottom of its scroll. Then I'm going to say this underscore last index equals new index. So this way, it'll only scroll down if a new message has appeared. We could definitely put in further checks if you wanted to. For example, if your mouse is currently over the chat box, you might want to disable automatic scrolling. But I'll leave that up to as an exercise for you guys. You would just probably, on the messages, you'd probably add an on mouse over, on mouse out, add a boolean, set a boolean to something, and then break out of component did update if the mouse is currently over that element, but that's not necessary. So with that, our chat box is pretty much complete as far as our structure goes. If we come back over here and refresh, we should see, check that out. We do indeed see our markup being, or our DOM appropriately marked up. So the last thing I want to do in this video is, you could probably guess what I'm going to do, is I'm going to style our chat box. So let's scroll down our chat box for one last time. If you guys want to pause the video, take a look at what I did here. And then we're going to style it. So let's hop into our chat.scss file and get going. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to include our variables. Whoops, I'm going to import our variables, not include. And then I'm going to create a variable up here called author width. You'll see why in a moment. I'm going to stylecchat. I'm going to include, this time include, because include is for mixins, import is for files. I'm going to include section. And what that does is you can see immediately that we get this nice border around this. Oh, I forgot. I do want to go ahead and make sure that this this thing at the bottom, this border, appears at the top. So I'm going to jump back in here and I'm going to scroll down to our text input and say class name equals border top. And that'll just put the border on the top for us. Whoops, I mean top border. And there we go. That looks good. So now let's style our chat box. So let's come over here, include section. We'll do a flex grow of 1 so that it grows large based off of the parent of the flex box. We'll do a display flex, but you couldn't see that coming. A flex direction of column and a position of relative. That's going to be important. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a background at the left. I'm going to say background, darken color background by 5%, a width of author width, a position of absolute, a top of 0, a left of 0, a height of 100%, a content of empty text, a z-index of 0, and a border right of 1px solid darken color background 10%. And what this will do is this will add this border, this background for where our author text is going to appear, even if there isn't an author element down there. But of course it doesn't look quite right yet because we haven't gotten our z-index properly set up yet. Now I'm going to open up messages. I'm going to include unlistify. I'm going to say flex grow 1. And what that'll do is that flex grow 1 will of course push our text box all the way to the bottom, which is what we want. And we'll say z-index is 100, overflow y is scroll, and position is relative. So now our text appears above our background. And then for each li, I'll give a padding of 3px0, a display of flex. I'm going to keep the flex direction as row, which is the default. I'm going to set the author to width of author width, not surprising, a text align of right, a padding right of 5 pixels, a box sizing of border box, so the padding doesn't increase the size of the element. And then I'm going to say align self center, so that the authors are centered, aligned vertically. Then I'm going to style our message, which will simply have a padding left of 5 pixels, and it's already starting to look like a nice little chat box. So now I'm going to jump all the way here to the bottom, so I'll scroll through this, because we're running out of time here. See that? And then I'm going to come down here and say form. I'm going to style the form. The form I'm going to give a z-index of 100 as well, so that it appears above everything. So now we see the placeholder appearing above our background. And then I'm going to say m-textbox, and I'm going to give him a background of color background. So his background will take over, so to speak, the background that we have right there. And then I'm going to change the padding of our text box a little bit. So inside of our m-text box, I'm going to grab the input, giving him a padding of 5 pixels all around, but with the padding top of 7 pixels. That those additional 2 pixels are for the border. And that's it. So we now have a text box. And I can enter in a message, hit enter. You'll notice that it is invoking, it's not submitting the form. If it's submitting the form, you have a problem with your code right here inside of your send message. And if we jump to the console, we should see sending, whatever message I'm sending. So yeah, a really, really simple, straightforward chat box that we can reuse both in the lobby and in the game. So hopefully you guys can see how React is very, very useful. We don't have to worry about adding or destroying elements or moving elements around or anything like that. We just send in the data, React does its thing, invokes our render method, and everything is awesome. So really, to finish our lobby is basically finished right now. All we're going to have to do is come here to our lobby container and our lobby sidebar and implement our callbacks, as well as grab these pieces of data that we're kind of fudging in here. We'll want to actually grab them from the appropriate place, but that's just sort of backend sort of stuff. The actual visual element, the DOM, is going to update appropriately, correctly, based off the data we pass in. And where we get that data, that's up to us. Obviously, in the future, we will be using Socket.io, but you could use XHR, or you could put in dummy data like I have here. And with that, I guess we're pretty much done with the lobby, and we'll see you guys in the next video.